Across Elevate, hundreds of small but consequential moments unfold each day. The last email of a contract negotiation goes out. A months-long discovery project closes on its final document. A sprint ends with the last ticket marked complete, and a new internal process quietly goes live. And almost without exception, before anyone has paused to capture what just happened, the next moment, the next task, the next project, the next big thing is already underway. Most companies operate this way by default. You start, you finish, you start, you finish, you start. The lessons from each piece of work, the things that worked, the things that didn't, the small frustrations and the small breakthroughs, all of them live for a few days in people's heads and then quietly evaporate. The team makes the same mistakes the next time, or just as wastefully, fails to repeat the things that made the last one a success. At Elevate, we have a small but powerful habit that interrupts that cycle. We call it after action assessment, or A3 for short. It is the structured pause we take during a piece of work or at the end of one to turn experience into learning and learning into expertise. Over the next few minutes, I'll walk you through what an A3 is, how we use it at Elevate, and the role that you play in making A3s a habit that sticks and succeeds. My name is Swapnil Gyani, and here's your practical guide to using after-action assessments effectively. Let's get started. Let us begin by looking at why this practice matters enough for us to give it a name, a process, and a place in every Elevator's toolkit. Every piece of work at Elevate, a contract review project, an ELM migration, a customer call, or a new internal process you're rolling out is, in effect, an experiment. You set out with a plan, encounter reality, and you adjust. The team learns an enormous amount along the way about the customer, about the work, about each other, about the tools, and about what does and does not actually work. Every activity we perform, not just the deliverables, creates an opportunity for learning. The problem is that learning lives in people's heads, and heads move on. Without a deliberate practice of stopping to capture what you learn, all of that hard-won insight quietly falls through the cracks between one project and the next. The practice of A3 exists to plug that leak. It serves three essential purposes. First, it converts experience into expertise. Take a team that runs the same kind of work month after month, say document reviews for a major customer. Without a habit like A3, the team finishes the 12th month no sharper than they finished the 6th. The same scoping mistakes recur, the shortcuts that worked in month 4 are forgotten by month 9, and 12 months of experience accumulates without compounding into anything meaningful. With the A3 habit, the team pauses after each round to write down what worked and what didn't. And that single act of writing forces clearer thinking and keeps the lessons accessible long after each round is over. Over time, that becomes the difference between a team with experience and a team that has transformed that experience into expertise. Second, it converts knowledge into shared learning. Without a habit like A3, the things that one team learns stays within that team, useful only to the people who happen to be there and only for as long as their memory holds. With the A3 habit, those same lessons end up on a page that the rest of us can read. What one team figured out at the end of a difficult project becomes a head start for another because every A3 written at Elevate is visible to every elevator. Take those A3s that the document review team from my previous example has been writing all year. They're all visible to members of the contracts team on the other side of the globe who are about to pick up that same customer's deal renewals. That visibility is not a coincidence. It is the whole point. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it makes honesty safe. Without the A3 habit, admitting what didn't go well feels risky, like opening yourself up to judgment or blame. So the harder truths stay buried and problems fester until they grow into crises. With the A3 habit, that A3 itself becomes a safe, normalized space where saying, "This thing didn't go well," is just a routine part of the job. Not a confession, not a verdict, just an honest look at what happened. That openness catches problems while they are still small and over time becomes the foundation of how Elevate gets better year over year. 3 of our 12 principles anchor this practice. We challenge ourselves to keep improving, we never stop learning, and we take calculated risks. and risks only stay calculated if we learn from each one. A3 is the practice that brings these principles to life. Now, before we look at how an A3 actually works, a quick word on where that name comes from. As much as we'd like to take the credit for it, A3 is not in fact an Elevate invention. It originated decades ago on the Toyota factory floor as part of what is now known as the Toyota production system, the same lean, continuous improvement tradition that has influenced operations thinking all over the world. That A3 in the name is literally the paper size, a roughly 12 by 16 sheet of paper. Toyota's idea was that any review of a project, problem or process should fit on a single sheet of A3 paper. That discipline of fitting your thinking onto one page forces clarity. If you cannot say what you learned in a space that the paper gives you, you have actually not thought it through clearly enough. At Elevate, we've kept the spirit of that original idea intact. One page, focused thinking structured around a small number of essential questions. We've of course adapted the format for modern legal and professional services work, and it comes in two flavors. The first is the hot wash, which is a quick in-flight A3 that you run during a piece of work, not just at the end of it. The phrase has military origins. Soldiers used to clean their weapons in water immediately after firing them while everything was still hot. The emergency preparedness world later picked it up to describe a fast debrief held right after an event before memories cooled. The hot wash captures three things in three short sections. First, what went well? This sounds easy, but it is the section that most teams skip in a hurry to fix what is broken. Naming what worked is how you make sure that it happens again, on the next project, on the next team, on the next continent. A good hot wash doesn't just record outcomes, it captures the specific decisions, behaviors, or process choices that produce those outcomes so that they can be repeated. Second, take a look at. The phrasing here is deliberate. It isn't asking who didn't do well. It isn't even asking what went wrong. It's asking the team to point out the things worth a second pass, the decisions, processes, and conditions that could be examined more carefully. The focus stays on the work, never on the people. The choice of words matters, and we'll come back to it in just a moment. Third, smart action items. This is what converts a review into a small set of specific, measurable commitments, each with someone's name on it and a date by which it is due. If a hot wash ends without those, you've basically written a journal entry, not an A3. The whole point is that something is different the next time the team picks up similar work. Hot washes are the workhorse of the A3 practice at Elevate. Of the hundreds of A3s we complete each year, around 80% are always hot washes. Quick, light touch, in the moment. Their power is that they let you course correct in real time instead of waiting until the project is over to discover that something has been quietly going wrong for 6 weeks. The second format is the full-scale A3, which is a more thorough review conducted at the end of a significant project. Instead of 3 open-ended questions of the hot wash, the full-scale A3 asks that we walk through 4 interconnected sections. First, objectives. This is where the team states in plain language what they had set out to achieve. The key discipline here is to capture the bar you set at the start of the project, not the bar you ended up clearing. It is tempting, especially when something doesn't go to plan, to soften the objectives so that the outcomes look better. Resist that. The whole point of the full-scale A3 is to compare what you committed to with what you delivered, and the comparison only works if the original commitment is captured honestly. Second, outcomes achieved. This is an honest accounting of what actually happened. Numbers where you have them, such as deadlines met or missed, budget against actual, quality measures, and specifics where you don't, how the work actually played out, what the customer said, what the team noticed. The temptation here is the opposite of the last one, to summarize too neatly and lose the detail. Resist that too. If your outcomes read like a clean summary, you've probably smoothed out the most useful parts. The rough details are where the learning truly lives. Third, root cause analysis. This is where the full-scale A3 earns its name, and it is also where most teams get stuck. The discipline here is to push past the first answer. The first reason you reach for is almost always a symptom, not a cause. So you ask why, and then you ask why again and again, and you keep going until you arrive at something structural. A process gap, a missing capability, an assumption nobody questioned, a broken handoff between teams. Root cause is not about finding the one person to point at, but rather about finding the conditions that made the gap likely so that you can change them. And fourth, smart action items. Same idea as in the hot wash, but in a full-scale A3, these tend to be more substantial because the root causes you've uncovered are usually structural rather than situational. Each action item gets a clear owner and a date by which it will be done. The bar is the same as ever. If you cannot tell whether an item got done or not, it isn't smart enough yet. A full-scale A3 takes longer to complete, but the depth is the point. It is where the deepest organizational learning tends to come from. Both formats are written up and shared across Elevate, so any A3 in either format becomes a permanent searchable record that anyone in the company can read and learn from. That is what turns one team's conversations into shared organizational learning. Hot wash during the work, full scale after the work. Same practice at two different scales. Now here's the part of A3 that takes the most practice, and the part that, if you get right, will instantly make you a better manager even outside of the A3 practice. Every A3 at Elevate is nameless and blameless. That is not a slogan, it is our working rule. Nameless means that we do not call out specific individuals, either by name or implication, in the write-up of what went wrong. Blameless means that we do not treat the A3 as a forum for assigning fault. The entire conversation is framed in terms of process, decisions, conditions, and systems, never people. The reason for this is not soft, it is practical. People will only be honest about what went wrong if honesty is safe. The moment an A3 starts to feel like a performance review in disguise, the truth disappears. People stop volunteering inconvenient facts and instead start protecting themselves and their teammates. And the entire purpose of the A3 practice collapses onto itself. So instead of writing Priya missed the deadline, we'd write something like, more work landed on the project partway through, but we did not renegotiate the deadline. Same facts, very different conversation. And almost always a more useful conversation because it points at something we can actually change, which is the whole point. So how do you practically use A3s as a manager? Well, three things to keep in mind. First, build the habit. The hardest part of A3s isn't believing in them, it's actually doing them. The reasons people skip A3s are all too familiar. The work didn't feel like it had any big lessons worth capturing. The next project is already underway and the A3 feels like extra work on top of the work that's already done. You'll do it later when things have settled a little bit. And by the time you get to later, the details that would have made the A3 useful have already faded from your brain. All of which is why you put your A3s on the calendar before the work even starts. For any project of meaningful size, schedule at least one hot wash partway through and a full-scale A3 at the end. For your team's recurring work, build hot washes into the regular cadence at the end of a sprint, after every major customer milestone, or once a month for ongoing operations. And remember, you don't need to wait for a project to do an A3. A team meeting that went sideways, a customer call that went superbly well, that new internal process that you just rolled out. All of these are fantastic A3 candidates. A3s only work if they are routine. The first one will feel awkward. The 10th one will feel natural. Second, steer the conversation. Pick the format up front. Hot wash if you are mid-project, full scale if you are closing one out. Send the questions to your team a day or two ahead so that they have an opportunity to prepare. If the conversation drifts towards people instead of processes, pull it back to the work. Write the answers down in plain language as you go, and when you're done, share it widely within your team. Third, close the loop. This is where most A3 practices die. Not in the prep, not in the conversations, but in the weeks afterward. An A3 is only valuable if something is better the next time around. That's what smart action items are for. Every change your team commits to gets a clear owner and a date by which it will be done. When you're drafting these action items, keep the list tight. 2 or 3 real changes will land. A list of 10 becomes a wish list that nobody comes back to. Then, as the dates come due, follow up. Acknowledge the items that were closed and provide additional support and guidance on the open ones until they are closed. If action items sit open for too long or keep recurring across A3s, the team will start to feel that this practice is just more paperwork and justifiably will stop taking it seriously. Now, before we close, one practice worth keeping in your back pocket for high stakes work is the pre-mortem. A pre-mortem is essentially an inverted A3 that you write before the project starts, while you can still do something about the answers. Get your team, and where possible the customer, into a room and ask the A3 questions. Imagine that this project has failed 3 months from now. What sorts of assumptions, mistakes and missteps could lead to that failure, and then work backwards from there to prevent those things from happening. Here's the idea I want to leave you with. A3s are the single most visible expression of how Elevate gets better by aggregating marginal gains. No single A3 is going to transform Elevate, but 50 of them in a quarter, 300 in a year, every team and every geo doing the same small disciplined thing, that really compounds. That's how we get meaningfully better year over year, one A3 at a time. So whether the work is still in motion or has just ended, and whether it went to plan or not, gather your team for an honest look at what just happened, commit to what you'll change and see those changes through. And keep doing it until you can't imagine working any other way. As ever, don't hesitate to reach out to the learning team if you have questions or need a hand in getting your first A3 off the ground. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.